All right, Trump is speaking in Glendale, Arizona. RFK Jr. is about to go on stage with him. You see him standing next to him. Let's just listen in here for a moment. Trump speaking, and RFK Jr. will speak in a moment.
Tonight that upon my election, I will establish a new independent presidential commission on assassination attempts. And they will be tasked with releasing all of the remaining documents pertaining to the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. And they will also conduct a rigorous review of the attack last month. But I tell you, I have never had more people ask me, please, sir, release the documents on the Kennedy assassination. And we're going to do that. And I also want to salute Bobby's decades of work as an advocate for the health of our families and our children. Nobody's done more. Millions and millions of Americans who want clean air, clean water, and a healthy nation have concerns about toxins in our environment and pesticides in our food. That's why today I'm repeating my pledge to establish a panel of top experts working with Bobby to investigate what is causing the decades-long increase in chronic health problems and childhood diseases, including autoimmune disorders, autism, obesity, infertility, and many more. We want every child in America to grow up and to live a long and healthy life. So I just want to ask Bobby to speak for a little while. I'll stand aside. I'm going to stand aside. But I can only tell you, I've known him a long time. We've been a little bit on the opposite side of the equation, but I will say this, he is a brilliant, I still think of him as young. He's not that young. I always call him young, but he's not that young. But he is a phenomenal person, a phenomenal man who loves the people of this country as much as anybody can love the people of this country. So, Bobby, please say a few words. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, President Trump. Thank you. Now, a few hours after the assassination attempt at Butler, I got a call from a safe food advocate named Kelly Means, who's been fighting for many years to try to end the corruption at CDC and FDA and USDA. And these institutions, these regulatory agencies, are actually run by the big food processing companies, the big ag and the chemical companies that they're supposed to regulate. And he said to me that he'd been advising me for many years and on my campaign. And he told me that night that he was also advising President Trump. And he asked if I would talk to President Trump. And I said, of course. And about a few minutes later, I got a call from the president. And we talked. We had a very good talk. And then he invited me to come see him the next day. And I went to Minneapolis and saw him. We met again a couple of weeks later in Florida. And we talked about, not about the things that separate us because we don't agree on everything, but on the values and the issues that bind us together. And one of the issues that he talked about was having safe food and ending the chronic disease epidemic. Our children are now the unhealthiest, sickest children in the world. Don't you want healthy children? And don't you want the chemicals out of our food? And don't you want the regulatory agencies to be free from corporate corruption? And that's what President Trump told me that he wanted. He also told me that he wanted to end the grip of the neocons on U.S. foreign policy. He said he didn't want any more $200 billion wars in Ukraine, that we could use that money back here in the United States. And the best way to build a safe America is to rebuild our industrial base and rebuild the middle class in this country. And don't you want a president who's going to get us out of the wars and who's going to rebuild the middle class in this country? And he told me that he wanted to end the censorship because the whole basis of American democracy is the free flow of information. And we know that a government that can silence its opponents has license for any kind of atrocity. And can you think of any time that you can look back in history and say that the people who were censoring were the good guys? They're always the bad guys, because it's always the first step down that slippery slope to totalitarianism. And don't you want a president who's going to protect America's freedoms? And who is going to protect us against totalitarianism? And I want to ask you again, don't you want a safe environment for your children? Don't you want to know that the food that you're feeding them is not filled with chemicals that are going to give them cancer and chronic disease? And don't you want a president that's going to make America healthy again? Thank you all very, very much, and God bless you, and God bless America.
All right, so you just heard RFK Jr. Those were very brief remarks. I'd anticipated, actually, Philip, that it could have gone longer than that. But first appearance together, endorsement, obviously hitting on his key issues. Right. Chronic disease, which was the one that fell on the most fertile ears with a lot of people, right? Autoimmune diseases and infertility and obesity, big food, all of that. Foreign policy, neocons, make America healthy again. Sure. The line. All right, but as you say, those aren't specifically chronic disease, anything you've ever heard Trump say before?
Yeah, no, I actually looked earlier. I looked because what he just said there, what RFK said, is what he said when he dropped out earlier today. I looked to see if Donald Trump could ever mention chronic disease, particularly in this context, and he had not. I mean, he did this. I mean, look, it's Donald Trump. There's pictures of the guy eating McDonald's on his plane. Like, this is not a guy who's deeply dedicated to healthy eating, right? I mean, the other things he said, though, like the thing about censorship, just total nonsense, right? He's referring to this Twitter file stuff, which has been debunked 1,000 times over. He said Donald Trump's going to protect us from totalitarianism because of the censorship thing. Like, all these things that he's saying, right? Again, to go back to the point that he also tried to get Kamala Harris to, like, give him a deal as well. So, I mean, it's also just, like, starkly insincere in a way that I think is pretty remarkable. Mm-hmm.
And yet, I mean, obviously you hear that's a rally, so you're going to have the response you have, Aisha, but is it possible that this does fall on some fertile ears, particularly because he's leading with the issue that many people found compelling, right? The issue of chronic disease is an issue that Americans do face.
But even the communication of it just felt a little bit incoherent to me. And that's the thing that struck me, because it actually did feel rather Trump-light in that he repeated the same 3 lines twice, once at the beginning, then coming back to it. Don't you want it to be safe for your kids and to get rid of chemicals in food, right? So beginning, it was formulaic. It felt like a whole lot of ramble in the middle. It felt contradictory as well, because he went into this thing about totalitarianism and do you want somebody who's going to weaponize the government against you? When in fact, that's exactly what Donald Trump has threatened to do time and time again, is weaponize the government against his enemies, essentially. So it all felt like really aligned with this rally, because it's just as rambling and incoherent as most of what Trump has to say.
Mark and Lulu, I want to get you in here. Tom Foreman is here now, though, because as Philip was talking about, this issue of chronic disease, how does it actually fit? What has Trump said? Tom Foreman, what have you found just looking over the facts here?
Yeah, looking over the facts here, in 2020, the World Health Organization looked at 180 countries around the world. RFK Jr. just said that our children are now the unhealthiest, sickest children in the world. The World Health Organization said, yeah, we ranked 39th in the world out of 180 countries. So not as good as it could be, but nowhere near the worst. And when he kept saying, don't you want a safe environment for your children? Don't you want a safe environment for your children? It's important to remember Trump, as president, rolled back dozens of measures out there to make clean water, clean air, the very things that create a clean environment for our children.
Right, and of course, you're talking about food supply. When you talk about safe environment, I mean, obviously, gun violence being the top issue, and they're talking about food.
Robert F. Kennedy Jr. suspending his presidential bid today and throwing his support behind Donald Trump. Brian Todd is joining us right now with more. Brian, RFK Jr. has had more than his fair share of strange, rather memorable, often very controversial moments since launching his campaign.
Right, Wolf. This campaign has been so bizarre, so fraught with strange stories and accusations that several members of Robert Kennedy Jr.'s own family are calling this whole thing sad. Analysts say it's put a stain on the reputation of one of America's great political dynasties.
In my heart, I no longer believe that I have a realistic path to electoral victory.
Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who started his run as a Democrat, then switched to being an independent, bows out of the race and endorses Donald Trump. And with that, one of the most unique presidential bids in American history comes to a close.
This isn't just your typical bizarre campaign. This is almost carnival-like.
In May of this year, Kennedy claimed that a parasitic worm had once entered his brain and died, which he said led to, quote, severe brain fog and trouble with his short-term memory. He actually joked about it.
Maybe a brainworm ate that part of my memory.
A few weeks ago, in a rambling video posted on X, Kennedy admitted that about 10 years ago, he was driving in upstate New York when he found the carcass of a dead bear that had been hit by a vehicle.
So I pulled over and I picked up the bear and put him in the back of my van because I was going to skin the bear.
Kennedy said he got sidetracked by several events that day, couldn't go home, didn't know what to do with the bear. So he decided to leave the carcass in New York's Central Park and make it look like a bike accident.
So we went and did that, and we thought it would be amusing for whoever found it or something.
The whole story, the wild, weird story that RFK Jr. told about the bear cub and how it got into Central Park has really made an impact, and not a positive one for him.
This summer, an article in Vanity Fair had a photo of Kennedy appearing to pantomime eating a dog carcass. Kennedy denied it was a dog.
It's actually me eating a goat in Patagonia.
That same Vanity Fair article published allegations that Kennedy had sexually assaulted a former nanny for his family. Kennedy sidestepped the accusations.
I am not a church boy.
All this following repeated episodes where Kennedy baselessly called the COVID-19 vaccines unsafe and espoused outlandish conspiracy theories about the vaccines.
COVID-19 is targeted to attack Caucasians and black people. The people who are most immune are Ashkenazi Jews and Chinese.
It's all led to a precipitous fall from grace for the son of an American political icon. Today, after he dropped out of the race and endorsed Trump, 5 of Kennedy's siblings issued a statement saying it's, quote, a sad ending to a sad story. Donald Trump has said he'd be open to appointing Robert Kennedy Jr. to a position in his administration if Trump wins in November. The analysts we spoke to say if Trump does that, it could create real problems for him, starting with the fact that because of his past behavior, it would be very tough to get Kennedy confirmed in Congress. Wolf?
Brian Todd reporting for us. Brian, thanks very much. I want to dig deeper right now with CNN political analyst Maggie Haberman. She's a senior political correspondent for the New York Times as well. Maggie, thanks for joining us. The New Yorker wrote this in a profile of RFK Jr. earlier this month, and let me read it to our viewers. In a recent text exchange, Kennedy told one person that Trump was a, quote, terrible human being, the worst president ever, and barely human. He is probably a sociopath, close quote. So how did this unlikely endorsement today of Trump come about?
So, Wolf, these are two very transactional people, and Robert Kennedy Jr. has been looking around, trying to make some kind of an endorsement deal with both candidates. The Washington Post reported recently that he had approached the Harris campaign about possibly supporting her and getting a meeting, and there was no meeting, but Trump has been much more receptive. Remember, these are two people, Kennedy and Trump, who met during Trump's 2017 transition. Bobby Kennedy claimed that Trump was going to appoint him to some kind of a vaccine commission, and then Trump's aides quietly distanced Trump from it. But Trump is open to having discussions with him. He likes him. Trump is a credentialist, and he likes the Kennedy name. So this all began shortly before the Republican National Convention, and it's been moving toward this. I think that RFK Jr. clearly sees he does not have a real path in this race, and this is a way to be relevant.
Trump called into Fox and Newsmax immediately after Kamala Harris's speech last night. Listen to part of what he said, Maggie.
It was a lot of complaining. She didn't talk about China. She didn't talk about fracking. She didn't talk about crime. She didn't talk about 70% of our people are living in poverty. She didn't talk about the trade deficit. She didn't talk about child trafficking that she's allowed to happen because she was the border czar and she presided over the weakest border in the history of our country.
By the way, the beeping you heard appears to be Trump inadvertently hitting buttons on his phone. So what do these interviews, Maggie, say about his mindset now?
Look, he's very reactive in all things when he is not in command, and we have seen this over the course of the last 9 years that he's been in politics or in the political arena. He is clearly, jarred by her. He has been trying to get back into the national conversation for several weeks now, ever since President Biden announced he wasn't running for re-election. He's doing that with this RFK endorsement today. He did it last night. He is trying to point out the areas where she separated herself, at least by omission, from President Biden, in terms of not tying herself to their joint record. There are a number of Trump's aides who would like him to basically just be saying Biden, Harris all the time. And so that's his way of doing that. We'll see if he can sustain it.
I thought it was interesting that when President Obama took the stage at the Democratic Convention, he made a comment about Trump's obsession with his crowd sizes. I want to play that clip. Listen to this.
There's the childish nicknames, the crazy conspiracy theories, this weird obsession with crowd sizes.
How has that moment landed with the former president?
So both of the Obama's speeches got under his skin. He is very reactive to both of them. We have seen that since 2011 when Trump spread the lie that President Obama was possibly born in Kenya and therefore illegitimate to be president. I think you're going to see more of this. What I was struck by, Wolf, in this convention is there was a pretty focused message about Trump, and we heard it over and over again from the Obamas, from the vice president, from others, that he is a rich guy who cares about his rich friends. But what you also saw were comments that I think were designed to bait Trump. That was one of them. The more that Trump reacts self-destructively, the better Democrats feel it is for them.
Important point. Maggie Haberman, thank you very much for your excellent analysis.
Breaking news, Vice President Kamala Harris's campaign now just responding to RFK Jr., saying this as he dropped out of the race, endorsing Trump.
Following my first discussion with President Trump, I tried unsuccessfully to open similar discussions with Vice President Harris. Vice President Harris declined to meet or even to speak with me.
I want to go straight to Priscilla Alvarez, who has been speaking with the Harris campaign. So, Priscilla, now we just heard what RFK Jr. said, and now you've talked to the Harris campaign. They're responding. What are they telling you?
Well, their focus is on the voters. They see an opportunity here to try to appeal to some of those voters who may have gravitated to RFK Jr. because they were disillusioned by Trump and then candidate President Joe Biden. So now they're putting out Kamala Harris as an option. Saying this in a statement, this is from the campaign chair, Jen O'Malley Dillon, quote, "For any American out there who is tired of Donald Trump and looking for a new way forward, ours is a campaign for you." This is echoing the message that the vice president gave yesterday during that speech at the Democratic National Convention. It's something we can anticipate in the weeks to come because, of course, it's going to be a close race. And to get to these voters, they're going to have to spend money. Now, we know the campaign has already put aside millions of dollars in digital and TV ads. But I'm also told that Harris advisors are having conversations about to keep the momentum going on fundraising, especially the grassroots donations. Those are harder to predict, so they have to capitalize on moments or create moments to inspire those donations. I'm also told they're talking about fundraising events, including potentially splashy ones, to keep that up. Now, of course, the vice president is clear-eyed on what comes next, and I'm also told that the debate, that September presidential debate, is another event that she is focused keenly on in the weeks to come. Aaron.
All right, Priscilla, thank you very much with that new reporting from the Harris campaign. Out front now, Stephen Kennedy Smith. He is Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s first cousin. So the way it goes is this. Stephen is the son of Jean Kennedy Smith, who is John F. Kennedy and Robert F. Kennedy's sister. So his father, Stephen Smith, a key political advisor to JFK. Stephen endorsed President Biden's reelection. He now supports Kamala Harris. So just so Stephen, everyone understands where you're coming from here. Today, your cousin suspended his campaign, throws his support behind Trump. You know, for you, this is, I mean, obviously deeply personal. This is your first cousin. You have known each other since you were very young boys. Just to show pictures of you as you were growing up, teens, a lot of your life. This is your first cousin. What do you think about this endorsement tonight?
Well, look, I agree with what one of your guests said earlier, which is that Robert F. Kennedy Sr. would be rolling over in his grave. You know, his most famous speech was after Martin Luther King was killed, and he said, what we need in this country is not division, is not hatred, is not violence and lawlessness. And that's exactly what Donald Trump has promulgated by promoting the attack on the Capitol that killed so many people. So for Bobby to endorse Donald Trump is an explicit betrayal of his father's stated values. That's as clearly as I can say it. The other thing I would say is that he was adjudged by a court in New York to have filed a false ballot application in New York, so he was going to be removed from the ballot in New York as well as 18 other states. Similarly in Arizona, he couldn't account for his signatures. He was going to be off the ballot in Arizona, so he really had no choice but to drop out of the race. And in the weeks up until today, he tried to negotiate a deal with both different campaigns. So if I were an RFK voter, I would be wondering about following the example and the recommendation of someone who was trying to make a deal for himself with both campaigns. That seems self-serving and opportunistic.
So I know obviously you see this as a point of, you know, political opportunism, expediency. Perhaps there are other words that you would use that capture your feelings better. But your cousin has said that the problem here is that the Democratic Party left him and that the Democratic Party has shifted. And he talked a little bit about that. I wanted to give you a chance to hear what he said.
It had become the party of war, censorship, corruption, big pharma, big tech, big ag, and big money.
You know, he often references, you know, to this point about his father rolling over in his grave. He references his father. He references your uncle. He references them. And he says the opposite. He says they would not recognize today's Democratic Party and that he is staying true to the principles as he sees of his father and his uncle. Do you think it's possible that he does truly believe that?
I mean, I don't know what Bobby believes because he's been a Democrat, then he's been an independent, now apparently he's a Republican. He's negotiated for a job with both parties at the same time. He's made a lot of inconsistent and bizarre statements. So I really can't say what Bobby believes. As far as what the Democratic Party stands for, you know, the Democratic Party under JFK, RFK, and EMK stood for universal health care. It stands for protection of the environment. It stands for tax cuts for the middle class. It stands for human rights and civil rights. Those are all the things that Kamala Harris spoke about last night. So the Democratic Party still stands for the same thing. The only problem that Bobby doesn't understand, it's not about him, it's about the country. And so the fact that he's disappointed in the Democratic Party says more about him than it does about the Democratic Party.
All right. Well, Stephen, I appreciate your taking the time. And as I said, I know it's a difficult time when it's someone you've known your whole life, part of your family. So thank you very much for coming out and sharing your thoughts, Stephen.
Absolutely. And, you know, I just want to say that I grew up, and you may relate to this, Aaron, in a Catholic school. In a Catholic school, I was taught you can dislike someone's behavior, but you always treat them courteously. And so that's the way we handle things in our family. But I felt an obligation to speak out on this.
All right. Well, Stephen, and thank you very much for doing that. I appreciate that, doing it here.
Sure.